The 500 acres of rolling hills and pine trees represented everything I had worked toward during my 40-year legal career. After stepping down as state attorney general 3 years ago, I purchased this ranch specifically for its isolation and tranquility. Cottonwood Estates was advertised as a loosely organized rural community where independence was valued and interference was minimal. That was precisely what I wanted after decades of public scrutiny and high-stakes litigation. My mornings began with coffee on the wraparound porch, watching deer graze along the tree line as the sun climbed over the eastern ridge. My evenings ended with quiet reflection beside the stone fireplace, often reviewing old case files not out of obligation, but out of continued interest in the law that had defined my life. Retirement suited me well. The ranch house I built featured wide windows overlooking the valley, and thoughtful security measures integrated seamlessly into the rustic architecture. Old habits from prosecuting dangerous criminals never truly fade. The first letter arrived 6 months after I moved in. A violation notice printed on Cottonwood Estates Homeowners Association letterhead cited my split-rail fence as non-compliant with aesthetic guidelines. I found this peculiar, considering my property predated the HOA formation according to county records. Nevertheless, I responded politely, explaining the grandfathered status of my ranch and requesting the specific bylaw reference for their complaint. 3 more notices followed within weeks. My decorative windmill was excessively tall. My gravel driveway needed to be uniformly maintained. My storage shed was improperly positioned. Each complaint seemed more arbitrary than the last, but I continued responding with professional courtesy, attaching relevant property surveys and township permits validating my compliance with all legitimate regulations. "This is becoming harassment," I told my former chief deputy Marcus during his monthly visit. We sat in rocking chairs watching the sunset paint the sky in deep oranges and purples. "The HOA has sent 5 violation notices this month alone." "Want me to look into who is behind it?" Marcus asked, ever the investigator. I shook my head. "Not yet. Probably some overzealous board member who does not understand pre-existing property rights. I have drafted a comprehensive letter clarifying my legal standing." The response to my clarification letter was not another notice, but a certified document threatening fines of $500 per day for continued noncompliance and warning of enforcement actions. The tone had shifted from bureaucratic to threatening. Something had changed. That evening, I pulled out my old contacts list. A quick call to the county records office revealed the HOA had recently undergone leadership changes. The new president, Richard Harmon, was not a name I recognized immediately, though something about it tugged at my memory. Morning light streamed through the kitchen windows as I prepared breakfast 2 days later. The security system chimed with an alert, multiple vehicles approaching. On the monitor, I watched 2 white SUVs with light bars on top crawling up my long driveway, followed by a black van with tinted windows. None displayed official law enforcement markings or license plates I recognized from state or county agencies. I straightened my shirt, checked that my home security systems were recording, and waited. Whatever this was, it was not a standard HOA dispute resolution. The vehicles parked in a formation that attempted to block my garage and front exits. 3 men in what appeared to be police uniforms emerged and approached my door with practiced synchronization. Their hands rested on holsters that should never have been issued to them. The doorbell rang. I opened it to face what would become the first battle in an unexpected war. "Sir, we are here to place you under arrest for continued violations of the Cottonwood Estates community standards and regulations." The man who spoke stood slightly ahead of his companions. He wore a uniform resembling county sheriff attire, but with subtle differences that only someone with extensive law enforcement experience would notice. The badge was the wrong weight and shape. The utility belt featured holsters not approved for official use. Most tellingly, none of them carried the standard-issue radios that real officers never operate without. "May I see your identification and the warrant?" I asked calmly, standing firmly in the doorway. The lead man produced a plastic identification card that was a reasonable facsimile of official credentials, but the holographic security features were absent. "Thomas Reinhardt, Cottonwood Estates Security and Enforcement Division. We have authorization from the HOA Board to detain residents in violation of community standards." "And what specific violations am I being detained for?" I kept my voice steady, using the word detained rather than arrested to test their reaction. "Numerous property violations after repeated warnings." The second man stepped forward, his hand still resting on his holster. "You need to come with us now to attend an emergency HOA disciplinary hearing." My right hand casually reached to adjust the thermostat panel beside the door, a motion that activated the ranch house comprehensive security recording system. All exterior and interior cameras began high-definition recording with audio enhancement. I had installed this system during my final years as Attorney General when death threats were common. Now it would serve a different purpose. "You appear to be armed," I observed, nodding their holsters. "Are you claiming the authority to use force for homeowner association violations?" The third man, shorter than the others with a poorly concealed eagerness, replied, "We are authorized to use all necessary means to enforce compliance, sir." I studied each of them carefully. Their nervousness was becoming evident. The slight fidgeting, the overly rigid postures, the frequent glances toward their vehicles. These were not trained law enforcement professionals. They were private security contractors drastically overstepping legal boundaries. "Let me be absolutely clear," I said, my voice dropping to the precise tone I had used in courtrooms when delivering key arguments. "There exists no legal authority in this state permitting homeowners associations to arrest or detain residents. Your presence here, under false pretenses of law enforcement authority, constitutes criminal impersonation of peace officers, a felony carrying significant prison sentences." The lead imposter maintained his facade. "Sir, you need to come with us now or we will be forced to." "To what?" I interrupted. "To physically remove me from my property. That would constitute assault, battery, attempted kidnapping, and criminal trespass. You are standing on private property belonging to a retired state attorney general who prosecuted cases exactly like this for over 20 years. The reaction was immediate. Their faces transformed from confident intimidation to unmasked concern. The leader took a half-step backward. "Before you consider your next action," I continued, "you should know that everything occurring on this property is being recorded with audio and video from multiple angles. Your vehicles, your faces, and every word you have spoken are now preserved as evidence." I reached slowly into my pocket and withdrew my retired Attorney General credentials, not legally significant but psychologically devastating to their pretense. "I suggest you remove yourselves from my property immediately. Any further action will result in criminal charges against each of you individually, as well as whoever sent you here." The third man spoke to the leader in a hurried whisper. "You said he was just some old man who would scare easily." "Shut up," the leader hissed, then attempted to recover. "There seems to be a misunderstanding. The HOA simply wanted—" "I know exactly what the HOA wanted," I interrupted again. "And I know it is illegal. You have 30 seconds to return to your vehicles and leave my property." After that, I begin making calls to the actual county sheriff, the state police, and several judges who owe me favors. Your names and faces will be flagged in law enforcement databases before dinner. They retreated hastily, maintaining the feeble pretense of authority until they reached their vehicles. The black van departed first, followed by the two SUVs. I watched them disappear down my driveway, then immediately went to my office to download and secure the security footage. This confrontation was not merely about homeowner association overreach. It was organized intimidation with possible criminal intent. I picked up the phone. This was not a battle I would fight alone. The morning after the confrontation, my ranch house transformed. The peaceful retirement sanctuary became a command center reminiscent of my days prosecuting organized crime syndicates. I cleared the dining room wall, attaching a large corkboard where I methodically pinned photographs, documents, and connecting threads of red yarn old-school investigation techniques that still serve their purpose in visualizing complex relationships. The security footage provided excellent images of the three imposters. Using my state government contacts, I was able to identify them within hours. Thomas Reinhardt, the leader, was a former security guard with a history of harassment complaints. The other two were employees of Centurion Private Security, a firm I now discovered was on retainer with the Cottonwood Estates HOA. These are not isolated incidents, Marcus said, reviewing the files spread across my kitchen table. My former chief deputy had arrived by noon, bringing his investigative experience and connections. Look at these complaints filed with the county ombudsman. 6 other homeowners have reported similar intimidation tactics from the HOA. I studied the pattern on a map of Cottonwood Estates. The targeted properties form a specific area. Why these homes in particular? The answer came from county development records. Each property with reported HOA harassment shared borders with undeveloped land recently purchased by Avalon Luxury Developments. My property, the largest among them, sat directly in the center of what appeared to be a planned resort complex. They want our land, I concluded, connecting another red thread on the board. The HOA is working with the developer to force homeowners to sell. By evening, 2 more allies had arrived. Sarah Chen, my former legal advisor, and Dominic Walsh, who had headed my special investigations unit. Together, we formed a formidable team with complementary skills honed during our years together in the Attorney General's office. The president of the HOA, Richard Harmon, has been making large deposits to an offshore account, Dominic reported, examining financial records obtained through his banking contacts. The timing corresponds with property sales in the targeted area. Sarah looked up from property records spread across the floor. I found something else. Harmon only moved here 18 months ago, buying his house just before becoming HOA president in a special election with suspiciously low turnout. The pieces were fitting together, but I still felt something missing. The name Richard Harmon continued to nag at my memory. While the others continued their research, I retreated to my study where years of case files remained meticulously archived. Something about this situation felt personal. The next morning, I visited 3 neighboring properties that had received similar harassment. Eleanor Whitfield, an 82-year-old widow, showed me certified letters threatening fines for her non-compliant garden fence. Thomas and Luisa Menendez had been cited for their child's treehouse. Robert Kavanaugh, a disabled veteran, had received multiple notices about his therapeutic ramp. They sent men to my door last month, Eleanor confided, her hands trembling as she poured tea. They claimed to be building inspectors, but they had guns under their jackets. I was so frightened I called my son about selling the house. I recorded her testimony, noting the similar tactics. Did they provide identification? I asked. Yes, but it looked wrong somehow. My late husband was a police officer. These did not look like real badges. That afternoon, we gathered at my ranch to consolidate our findings. Dominic had identified the registration of the black van from my security footage. It belonged to Centurion Private Security, owned by Marcus Harmon, Richard Harmon's brother. I tracked the money, Sarah announced. Avalon Luxury Developments has been paying consulting fees to Richard Harmon through a shell company. For each property acquired below market value, he receives a percentage. There is more, I said, finally placing the connection that had eluded me. From my archives, I pulled the file on State v. Avalon Construction, 2018. Richard Harmon previously went by Richard Hammond. He was executive vice president of Avalon Construction when we prosecuted them for fraud and environmental violations 5 years ago. The company rebranded after paying millions in fines and settlements. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. This was not random HOA harassment. It was calculated revenge combined with profit motive, orchestrated by someone I had personally prosecuted. They specifically targeted you, Marcus concluded. This entire scheme has two objectives: acquire valuable property cheaply and exact revenge on the attorney general who damaged their company. Which means they will escalate, Dominic added. Retreat makes them look weak. I stood at the window, watching the sunset over the ranch. I had no intention of surrendering. Then we do not give them time to regroup. Tomorrow, we begin our counteroffensive. That night, as my allies continued gathering evidence, I made calls to judges, reporters, and current law enforcement officials who had once been colleagues. By morning, we would have a network of support ready to expose the conspiracy that had targeted not just me, but an entire community of vulnerable homeowners. The hunter had, indeed, become the hunted. The investigation proceeded with methodical precision over the next 3 days. Each team member contributed their specialized skills to unraveling the conspiracy that had infected Cottonwood Estates. My home office became a secure data center, with encrypted computers processing financial records, property transactions, and communication patterns between the key players. Avalon purchased the land surrounding the community 2 years ago, Sarah explained, pointing to highlighted areas on the county plat map spread across my desk. But their master plan required additional properties to connect these parcels. Specifically, properties along this ridge, including yours. Dominic tapped his laptop screen, displaying spreadsheets with highlighted transactions. The HOA began aggressive enforcement actions immediately after Richard Harmon took control. Notice the pattern: citation, escalation, threat, then below-market sale. They have acquired 14 properties this way in the past year. The tactic was clear, but proving the conspiracy required solid evidence. Marcus returned from the county recorder's office with a crucial discovery. Cottonwood Estates' original governing documents had been improperly amended 3 months after Harmon became president. The changes dramatically expanded the HOA's enforcement powers without the legally required homeowner vote. The amendments were never properly ratified, Marcus explained. They simply filed new documents with different language and began operating under them. Most residents never even knew. By midnight, Dominic had succeeded in accessing the HOA's financial records through his contacts in the State Banking Commission. The results were damning. HOA funds had been systematically diverted to Centurion Security and various shell companies, all linking back to Avalon Developments. They are emptying the reserve accounts, Dominic said. Classic strip and flip operation. Once they acquire enough properties, they will dissolve the HOA entirely to remove any obstacles to development. Sarah discovered emails between Harmon and Avalon executives discussing problem properties and resistance cases, with my ranch specifically mentioned as the central obstacle. One email particularly disturbed me. The retired AG needs stronger persuasion. Standard intimidation insufficient. Proceed with Phase 2. What is Phase 2? Marcus asked, concern evident in his voice. A knock at the door interrupted our speculation. Robert Kavanaugh, the disabled veteran I had interviewed earlier, stood on my porch with a portable hard drive in his hand. "I have something you need to see," he said, his expression grave. "My security cameras caught this last night." The video footage showed three men in dark clothing approaching his home at 2:00 a.m. They appeared to be tampering with his wheelchair ramp, loosening bolts and removing support brackets. Even more disturbing was their conversation, captured clearly on audio. "Harmon wants him out by the end of the month," one man said. "If the old man takes a fall, he will be in a nursing home and we can move on the property." "Same playbook as with the Jenkins place?" another asked. "Yeah, but more subtle. The AG is watching now. No more costume party visits." Robert's hands shook as he explained. "I installed those cameras after the first harassment. They did not know they were being recorded. I checked the ramp this morning. It would have collapsed if I had used it." This was attempted assault, possibly attempted murder. The conspiracy had escalated from intimidation to physically endangering residents. I copied the video files and immediately called the county sheriff, a former prosecutor who had worked under me for years. While waiting for law enforcement to arrive, Sarah made another discovery that connected the final dots. Buried in old corporate filings was evidence that Avalon's CEO, Victor Drummond, had lost millions when our office prosecuted their previous company for environmental violations. He had been forced to sell his mansion and luxury assets to pay legal penalties. "This is personal vengeance," Sarah concluded, "combined with a $60 million development opportunity. Your ranch sits on what would be the Central Lodge location according to these plans." The sheriff arrived personally, reviewing our evidence with growing concern. "This goes beyond HOA disputes," he said. "This is organized criminal activity. I will need all of this documented for warrant applications." As the sheriff departed with copies of our evidence, promising to begin a formal investigation, I received an email that confirmed our suspicions about the conspiracy's reach. A judge I had contacted about the improper HOA amendments forwarded a message he had received from Richard Harmon, attempting to explain the situation with the troublesome retired AG who is destabilizing our community with false accusations. "They are trying to get ahead of us," Marcus observed. "They know we are building a case." I nodded, studying the email carefully. They still do not realize what they are dealing with. They think this is a dispute they can manage through connections and influence. Dominic looked up from his computer. "I just found something else. Harmon has called an emergency HOA meeting for tomorrow evening. The agenda includes a vote on emergency powers to address community threats and approval for legal actions against non-compliant residents." I smiled for the first time in days. Perfect. That gives us exactly what we need. All the conspirators in one room, documented in an official meeting, attempting to further their illegal scheme. The next morning, we finalized our countermeasures. The evidence was organized into legal briefs, media packets, and law enforcement documentation. 12 hours later, We would walk into that HOA meeting not as victims, but as prosecutors ready to expose a criminal conspiracy that had terrorized an entire community. The trap was set. The conspirators had no idea they were about to spring it themselves. The Cottonwood Estates Community Center was illuminated against the darkening evening sky as vehicles filled the parking lot. Residents arrived with confused expressions, many clutching the emergency meeting notices that had appeared in their mailboxes only 24 hours earlier. Richard Harmon stood near the entrance, greeting people with practiced charm, his smile not reaching his eyes. I deliberately arrived 10 minutes late, flanked by Marcus and Sarah. The room fell silent as we entered. Harmon's smile faltered momentarily before he regained his composure. "Ah, our concerned resident attorney has decided to join us," he announced with forced joviality. "Perhaps now we can address the disruptive rumors being spread about our HOA management." I nodded politely, taking a seat in the second row. Dominic was already positioned near the audiovisual equipment, having arrived earlier disguised as technical support. Outside, news vans from 3 local stations were parking quietly behind the building, reporters waiting for the signal we had arranged. Harmon called the meeting to order with exaggerated authority. "We face unusual challenges requiring decisive action," he began, gesturing toward an easel holding community planning charts. "Certain residents have refused to comply with our standards, threatening property values and community harmony." For 30 minutes, I watched him build his case for expanded HOA powers, including the authority to place liens without court approval and to access properties for compliance inspections. The gaslighting was masterful. Problems were invented, fears stoked, and solutions presented that would grant the board, controlled by Harmon, unprecedented powers over residents' homes. When he finally opened the floor for discussion, I remained seated as 3 other residents, all victims of harassment, spoke first, asking pointed questions about specific incidents. Harmon deflected each skillfully, portraying them as isolated misunderstandings. "If there are no further questions," Harmon said, reaching for his gavel, "we should proceed to the vote on these emergency measures." I stood. "I have several questions." The room focused on me as I walked calmly to the front, carrying a leather portfolio. "First, Mr. Harmon, I wonder if you could explain why the HOA has spent over $200,000 on private security services in the past 6 months, when our annual budget allocates only $15,000 for all security concerns." His face tightened. "Those figures are inaccurate. We have increased security due to recent concerns about residents who would not sell their properties to Avalon Developments." I interrupted, opening my portfolio and placing financial records on the projector that Dominic had secretly connected. "These are the HOA bank records showing payments to Centurion Security, owned by your brother, Marcus Harmon." Murmurs spread through the room as residents looked at the projected figures. Harmon attempted to regain control. "This is a complex security arrangement that benefits." "Perhaps you could also explain this," I continued, signaling Dominic to change the projection to emails between Harmon and Avalon executives. "These communications show you receiving consulting fees for each property acquired below market value after HOA harassment." The room erupted in shocked conversations. Harmon banged his gavel repeatedly. "This is slander. These are fabricated documents intended to undermine legitimate HOA governance." I nodded to Dominic, who played the security footage from my ranch showing the fake officers attempting their intimidation. "Is this also fabricated? 3 men impersonating police officers, attempting to arrest, a resident for HOA violations, a legal impossibility. As the video played, I noticed Harmon texting frantically under the table. I continued methodically presenting evidence: the falsified HOA amendments, the pattern of targeted harassment, and finally, the footage from Robert Kavanaugh's home showing deliberate sabotage of his wheelchair ramp. This is not about property values or community standards, I concluded. This is organized criminal conspiracy involving fraud, attempted assault, impersonation of law enforcement, and racketeering. Harmon stood abruptly. This meeting is adjourned. These accusations will be addressed through proper legal. The community center doors opened. Sheriff Markson entered with 4 deputies. "Richard Harmon, we have warrants for your arrest on multiple charges including conspiracy to commit fraud, criminal impersonation of law enforcement, and attempted assault." As the sheriff proceeded with the arrest, process servers entered from side doors, approaching each HOA board member with civil lawsuit papers, nomming them as defendants in a class action lawsuit filed on behalf of harassed homeowners. Outside, news cameras captured Harmon being escorted to a patrol car. Inside, I addressed the stunned residents. "This HOA has been operating illegally for months. The amendments to your governing documents were never properly ratified. You have been living under unauthorized rules enforced through intimidation and fraud." An elderly woman stood. "What happens now to our homes, to our community?" "That," I replied, "is for you to decide. But you will do so legally, transparently, and without the influence of developers attempting to seize your properties." As the meeting dissolved into intense discussion groups, Sarah approached me. "Your phone has been buzzing non-stop. It looks like Avalon's attorneys are trying to reach you." I checked the messages. They want to discuss an amicable resolution before this situation unnecessarily escalates. "Are you going to call them back?" Marcus asked. I pocketed the phone. "They can wait until morning. This is only the beginning." As we left the community center, residents approached with handshakes and tearful thanks. The conspiracy had been exposed, but the battle to restore justice was just beginning. The knock at my door came at 9:15 p.m., 3 days after the HOA meeting. Through the security monitor, I observed 3 figures in expensive suits standing on my porch, 2 men and a woman, all carrying leather briefcases. I recognized one immediately: Jeffrey Sanderson, Chief Counsel for Avalon Developments. "We would like to discuss a resolution," Sanderson said when I opened the door. His voice carried the practiced smoothness of a corporate attorney accustomed to solving problems with money. "May we come in?" I led them to my kitchen table, deliberately choosing the informal setting rather than my office. Marcus sat quietly in the corner, serving as witness. The attorneys arranged themselves with practiced precision, placing a sealed envelope in the center of the table. "My clients recognize that unfortunate events have occurred," Sanderson began. "Actions taken by certain individuals were neither authorized nor condoned by Avalon Developments." "Interesting position," I replied, "considering the email evidence directly linking your CEO to those actions." The female attorney, Davis, according to her introduction, interjected smoothly. "Those communications have alternative interpretations. However, we are not here to debate liability but to offer fair compensation and closure." She slid the envelope toward me. Inside was a settlement offer for $8 million, contingent upon my signing a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement and withdrawing all complaints against Avalon and its executives. This is a generous offer reflecting the potential value of your property plus considerable compensation for any distress, Sanderson explained. Additionally, Avalon will replace the current HOA board with independent managers until development plans are finalized. I studied the document carefully. The amount was indeed substantial, more than triple the market value of my ranch. The terms also included a provision that would dismiss all charges against Richard Harmon and the security contractors. What about the other homeowners who were harassed? I asked. Eleanor Whitfield, Robert Kavanaugh, the dozen others who were intimidated. We are prepared to offer fair market value for their properties, the third attorney replied, plus a 10% inconvenience premium. I placed the document down, and the criminal charges. With your cooperation, the district attorney would likely consider those a lower priority, Sanderson suggested. Civil resolutions often influence prosecutorial discretion. The offer was meticulously constructed to appeal to self-interest. I could walk away wealthy, free from further conflict, with assurances that the most aggressive harassment would end. For a moment, the temptation existed, not for the money, but for the simplicity of personal resolution. I rose from the table and walked to the window, looking out at the ranch lands illuminated by moonlight. Beyond my property lay Eleanor's small house where she had lived for 40 years, and further down, Robert's adapted home built specifically for his disabilities. Your offer addresses my personal grievances, I said finally, but it systematically ignores the community harm caused by your client's actions. I returned to the table with my own document, a counterproposal prepared in anticipation of this very meeting. Here are my terms. Full restitution to all affected homeowners at current market rates, plus emotional distress compensation. Public disclosure of all illegal activities. Restoration of all HOA funds diverted to private accounts, and criminal accountability for those who broke the law. Sanderson scanned the document, his expression hardening. This is not a negotiation my clients can entertain. The public disclosure alone would create accountability, I finished for him, which is precisely the point. You were Attorney General, Davis said, attempting a different approach. You understand that complex situations rarely benefit from public exposure. Private resolution allows healing without further community division. I met her gaze steadily. I was Attorney General because I believe in justice, not expedience. Some wrongs cannot be remedied in private. This conspiracy targeted vulnerable homeowners, threatening their safety and stealing their property equity through intimidation. That requires public accountability. The attorneys gathered their materials, recognizing the impasse. At the door, Sanderson made a final attempt. This offer expires at midnight. After that, Avalon will vigorously contest all allegations through every available legal channel. I would expect nothing less, I replied. But perhaps remind your client that I have never lost a case against Avalon, not when I was Attorney General and not now. After they departed, Marcus approached. That was a lot of money to walk away from. I returned to the window, watching their luxury cars retreat down my driveway. Some things cost more than money. If we settle privately, similar schemes will continue elsewhere against people without our resources or knowledge. The decision was made. We would proceed to public accountability, regardless of the challenges ahead. This fight was no longer about my ranch, but about establishing consequences for those who would use wealth and influence to victimize communities. The morning news helicopters hovered over Cottonwood Estates, capturing aerial footage as police cruisers converged on multiple locations throughout the community. 6 months had passed since I rejected the settlement offer, months filled with legal motions, evidence hearings, and increasing public attention to the case that had grown beyond a simple HOA dispute. From my porch, I watched the synchronized law enforcement operation with quiet satisfaction. The state attorney general, my successor and former protege, had taken personal interest in the case, forming a special prosecution task force after reviewing our evidence. Today's coordinated arrests represented the culmination of their investigation, targeting not just the local conspirators but reaching into corporate offices and even the county permit department where officials had been bribed to expedite Avalon's development plans. The Centurion Security Office was the first location raided, with officers confiscating computers and files documenting their illegal intimidation tactics. Simultaneously, Richard Harmon was escorted from his home in handcuffs, cameras capturing his stunned expression as reporters shouted questions about racketeering charges. "Justice moves slowly, but it does move," Marcus observed, standing beside me with coffee mugs in hand. By noon, the news reported 12 arrests including Avalon's CEO Victor Drummond and 3 county officials. The charges ranged from conspiracy and fraud to attempted assault and impersonating law enforcement. The investigation had expanded far beyond our initial discoveries, revealing systematic corruption reaching into multiple developments across the state. The community center was filled beyond capacity that evening. Residents gathered not in fear as before, but in solidarity and determination. The temporary community council we had helped establish, comprising respected residents with no development ties, presented their findings and recommendations for restoring proper governance. Eleanor Whitfield, now serving as interim council president, spoke with renewed confidence. "For too long, we allowed ourselves to be intimidated and divided. Today marks a new beginning for Cottonwood Estates, one where transparency and actual community interests guide our decisions." I sat deliberately in the back row, declining invitations to speak. This moment belonged to the residents reclaiming their community. When Robert Kavanaugh proposed establishing a legal defense fund for any future HOA disputes, the measure passed unanimously. When another resident suggested creating a community oversight committee to review all board decisions, hands raised throughout the room in support. The most emotional moment came when 3 families returned, homeowners who had been forced out through intimidation tactics, but were now reclaiming their properties through the court-ordered rescission of the fraudulent sales. Applause filled the room as they shared their stories and thanked those who had helped expose the conspiracy. 2 state legislators arrived midway through the meeting, listening attentively before introducing themselves. "What happened here has exposed vulnerabilities in our state HOA regulations," Representative Keller explained. "We are drafting new legislation to prevent similar abuses across the state. We would welcome your input as directly affected residents." The proposed legislation would later become known as the Cottonwood Bill, establishing criminal penalties for HOA intimidation tactics, requiring transparent governance, and limiting emergency powers. But that evening, it was simply the beginning of reform inspired by one community's resistance to corruption. As the meeting concluded, I slipped out quietly, walking the half-mile back to my ranch under a canopy of stars. The property remained unchanged physically, the same rolling hills, the same wraparound porch, the same sense of peaceful isolation. Yet its significance had transformed profoundly. What began as a personal retirement sanctuary had become something more meaningful, a demonstration that knowledge and persistence could defend not just property rights but community values. The following weeks brought resolution on multiple fronts. The civil lawsuit resulted in a $20 million settlement distributed among affected homeowners. The criminal prosecution secured guilty pleas from most defendants, with Richard Harmon and Victor Drummond facing substantial prison sentences. The HOA governance was completely restructured with new bylaws emphasizing homeowner protections. 1 month later, I installed a handcrafted wooden sign at the entrance to my property. It read simply, "Justice Ranch." The name felt appropriate, not as a monument to my career, but as a reminder that justice requires vigilance and collective action. A leaner visited that afternoon, bringing homemade bread and conversation. "You could have taken their money and walked away," she observed. "Most people would have."